Now come along and listen to us talk with the Bond Jam. Go and have a lovely little walk with the Bond Jam. Or maybe put it on and go to bed with the Bond Jam. Or grab yourself a slice of toast and spread with the Bond Jam.
Hello and welcome to Bond Jam with me, Simon Jeffrey, and I'm joined by the Safin to my Sanchez. It's Mr. James Turner.
So is that a little clue as to which selections you're going to be choosing for today's episode?
Could be. Now, back in our episode, I believe it was the Allies episode, we received some correspondence, and one of those correspondences was from my nephew, Leo, who asked us a question about our favourite villains. And we said at that point that we thought that was such a big topic, it deserved its own episode. So this is what we're doing now, and this one is for you, Leo, as well as all our many adoring fans out there. So, today we'll be taking a similar approach to what we did back then, taking some the best and worst of our personal choices, as well as a bit of discussion about what we think makes a good or a bad villain. So, maybe that's a good place to start, James.
Yeah.
What is a good villain? What do you look for in a good villain?
How memorable they are for a start. Do you understand their motives behind their plan?
Yep. Perhaps I hadn't really considered much to do with their plot or their plan so much as just really their impact on the film, their charisma or their characterization.
Yeah.
You know, the cast of characters of any given film is a bit like different colours of paint on a palette. And for me, like, every character should be a different colour to contrast, to bring something different to the film.
Yeah.
And to sit in amongst the pantheon of all the many villains that have come before as being something unique and memorable that they bring to it. If they're a sort of carbon copy of a previous villain, then that might dock them some points, in my opinion. And same goes for henchmen and women, which we might touch upon as well, because in doing this topic, I found hard to distinguish what made someone a main villain as opposed to a hench person.
Yeah, because there are also certain films that may have two main villains as the main villain, essentially. So
absolutely, some films have definitely got multiple main villains.
Yeah,
and whether or not that character might be working for someone else, that doesn't necessarily make them a henchman in the sense of what an archetypical hench person does within film lore, within the James Bond world. I think it's more down to the role that they play in the story rather than, whether they are literally the top of the chain of command or not. So do you want to kick us off with perhaps one of your top picks for a Bond villain?
Yeah, so one of my favourite villains, has always been one of my favourite villains, is Max Zorin in A View to a Kill.
As played by Christopher Walken, of course.
Indeed, yeah. And there are many reasons why I like Christopher Walken's Zorin. I love the scene where he's on his computer and he's trying to find out who Bond is, and it comes up that he's dangerous. And he gives a little smirk, or a little laugh even. From
memory, I think you may have even put his laugh in the Hall of Fame, did you not?
Did I? Because he even laughs when he falls to his death as well, which just shows how insane and crazy Zorin is as a character. For some reason, his only closest allies is Scarpine and
Karl Mortner.
Karl Mortner, yeah. Yet he willingly kills all the other people who he thought he cared for, things like people like Mayday.
Yeah, he is a truly sort of psychotic megalomaniac in the sense of the word.
Yeah.
He cares about no one for very long.
Yeah.
Very few trusted confidants, and that makes him kind of scary and unpredictable. He would, just shoot someone dead for the sake of getting them out of the picture or simply even for his own amusement sometimes.
Yeah.
Very charismatically played, and I think it came at a point in Roger Moore's films where he was obviously getting on a bit in age, and to cast him against someone younger and so full of energy.
Yeah.
I perhaps didn't do Roger Moore any favors, but you could argue that it presented a different and a unique challenge for Bond that he hadn't sort of come across as actually almost being outmatched physically, in terms of not necessarily brute strength, but in terms of youth and energy. That this is a more of a techno threat, more akin to sort of a Gustav Graves type figure almost, in terms of like, you know, the younger, more tech savvy generation. And obviously Christopher Walken brings his unique kind of energy to the performance to make him memorable, regardless of what you think of the film. I know we're both fans of A View to a Kill. We both got a soft spot for it, but we also acknowledge that it's not universally loved. But I think even the people who don't like the film as much,
he's a great character. He's psychotic, and no, I think he's one of my top villains.
So shall I add to this list?
Yeah, let's go for it.
As I say, you know, there's some grey area between whether they're main villains or henchmen, but I'm going to go with one that I think is absolutely undeniably a big bad main villain. I'm going to sort of go for the very first iteration of Blofeld.
Oh, okay, right.
The unseen iteration.
Right, okay, yeah.
So, not necessarily the main villain of those films in which he appears, but certainly the big bad at the very top of the chain of command above the villains of those individual films.
So it's that shadowy figure that we don't get information.
Yes, he obviously did go on to become the main villain in later films, in You Only Live Twice, in Diamonds Are Forever, and On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and of course later on in Spectre. But I think in terms of establishing a kind of iconic recurring nemesis, those early films really set this up, this idea, and you could argue until the cows came home about whether or not the later films lived up to this promise. But at the very least, to begin with, in From Russia with Love and Thunderball, there was this man at the very top who was untouchable, who was, you know, Bond never got anywhere near. He kept coming across his underlings and his number twos and his, second in commands and all his other disciples from Spectre. But very early on it established, but there's this other guy behind it all, and Bond's not coming close to him yet.
Yeah.
I would argue that, you know, the Donald Pleasance version didn't really live up to the gravitas that had been established. It was a sort of different characterization by that point, but I'm sort of separating out these iterations of Blofeld and sort of singling out, in terms of its contribution to the mythos of Spectre and establishing this sense of scale and threat of this organization. I think it just deserves merit and mention, you know, based on that.
I never even thought about the unseen Blofeld really, but I think he adds so much intrigue and mysteriousness to who he is, as who his identity is. Makes you want to find out more about him, but just teases you enough.
Because if you think specifically about those plots of From Russia with Love and Thunderball, you could tell those stories without that character in it.
Yeah.
But it would just be a story about Bond taking down a guy who's doing bad things.
Yeah.
And, you know, but with Blofeld at the top of all of this and behind all of this, you can watch those films and think, well, sure, Bond has succeeded now, but he hasn't got to the root of this yet.
Yeah.
And it had a more sort of, more of a franchisey feeling beginning to grow a bit more of a, maybe one day he'll get there, but he hasn't got close yet.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of thinking contextually within the time period when those movies were coming out, before we knew what they were going to go on to become, it established this sort of figurehead, this archetype of cinema that went on to become copied and parodied. And
I think that's what kind of Spectre gets wrong. I think the film Spectre is that he's just kind of introduced straight away, and then they kind of retcon the fact that, he's been behind all of it all along, and really there's not been enough of that shadowy figure beforehand for it to suddenly make sense.
As with a lot of the later Craig films, they have attempted to retrofit some kind of through line and continuity that wasn't obviously considered to begin with.
Yeah.
They were trying to pretend that this was always the game plan, and it so clearly wasn't, and I think it harmed the overall feeling of his tenure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm gonna start off on a strong, bold icon. It's not a performance so much as just an archetype being forged in those early films.
No, that's a good choice. Good choice.
Have you got one, James?
I'm going to choose one here that I didn't think I would choose, but the more I think about it, I don't see why he wouldn't be on my top list. So I'm going to go for Alec Trevelyan. I'm not one of those people who goes, "Oh, GoldenEye's the best Bond film ever made," and all that. But Alec Trevelyan, in fact, that GoldenEye does have a great list of villains in there, and obviously in GoldenEye, the person at the top is Alec Trevelyan, and the fact that he is a former 00 agent, he's 006. We see him at the start of the film working with Bond, as well as, and then we see the darker side to him too. I think he is Bond's equal in every way, and the fight at the end where they are going toe to toe, they are fighting each other, and they are using similar moveset, and it's a great fight at the end. I think that's what makes Alec Trevelyan a really good villain, and different to the villains we've seen previously in other Bond films.
Yeah, I'm sort of relieved that you've brought up GoldenEye, because I saw him on the list and I just thought he doesn't really hold that special place for me personally, but I feel like we might be attacked for missing him off the list. So he has had a mention, and I agree with what you said. I always enjoy Sean Bean. Let's just get that out of the way. And his chemistry with Brosnan is great. He's very physical, and like you say, that fight with Bond feels hard hitting and well matched. Yeah, like he ticks all these boxes in terms of being that sort of different flavour of Bond villain that we were less familiar with at that point. And so I'm glad that he's got a mention. I wasn't going to single him out myself, but I think I can concede that he is one of the most memorable.
And like I say, I think it's because of the fact that we've not seen really too much of the other 00 agents, other than little teasers from in other films such as 009 and Octopus. It was probably perhaps the biggest role we've seen of another 00 agent.
And they've always generally been portrayed as kind of just people in suits attending briefings and things, like in Thunderball.
Yeah.
It's always been hard to imagine them as being even close to being equally matched to Bond. Bond has always been portrayed as the best of the 00s. For the first time in GoldenEye, we got a character that you could believe if he hadn't turned, he would have been equally skilled and equally as capable as 007.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, good shout.
Do you want to go for yours next?
From one that, maybe you were playing devil's advocate to some extent there and going with someone that you didn't necessarily have such an affinity for, but you felt like you needed to recognise, the kind of global appeal of that character to some extent. I'm going to go the other direction here. I'm going to recognise someone whom perhaps is not as frequently recognised. I'm going to go for Elliot Carver.
I'm glad you said that. I'm in exactly the same position where I'm not going to say him, but I'm glad he's getting recognised in this episode.
Because I've heard criticism, I've heard reviews that sort of laugh and jeer and sort of say, oh, he's not a physical threat. He'd be easy to take down if Bond and him were hand to hand. There'd be no contest. That his plot is kind of laughable in this day and age. I reject that argument outright because it's not this day and age. It was the 90s, and saying, oh, it's basically like Elon Musk or Rupert Murdoch or someone like that. Well, yeah, but that's kind of its time. Imagine some social media guru or entrepreneur attempting to use his powers for great damage and warmongering. But as I said at the start, what I'm looking for is a character that doesn't retread the same flavours that we've tasted before, the same textures of villain, not filling the same mould we've seen before.
Yeah.
And hot on the heels of Sean Bean as being an equally physically matched and intelligent villain, we have someone who would probably get beaten to a pulp by Pierce Brosnan hand to hand, but then join the club. You know, that like plenty of villains are intellectual, not physical. I'm not going to mention this particular name as its individual mention, but in terms of a controversial pick that I genuinely considered fighting the corner of, I'm going to, you know, draw a comparison with Dominic Green, you know, as a sort of different type of threat. They don't have to be physical, but he held power over Bond. You know, he held power, like Elliot Carver holds the power over the news coverage. He has this sort of tense control over particularly the news in China, which he's kind of exclusively got access to, and the power that gives him, and the power of manipulation of those facts and fake news, and it plays into a lot of topics that are still prescient and still relevant, regardless of how quaint it might all seem when it's to do with newspapers, extended beyond that into social media, which they would have done at the time if it was a thing. And I just think Jonathan Pryce gives a really spirited, enthusiastic, energetic performance.
Absolutely. I mean, I think he's ahead of his time essentially as a villain, because I think the power of the media now is much more dominant than it was in 1997. So I think he's more relevant as a villain today than he was back then. So I agree. I think he is a really strong villain, regardless of his lack of physical threat.
And I think what's motivating some of my choices is a wish to sort of fight the corner of the little guy from time to time, and not just simply to sit here repeating the most quoted iconic villains of the series and just sit here going, oh, you know, your Goldfingers, your Dr. No's, and all this stuff. Other podcasts have probably done that, but I'm here to stand up for my personal picks of what I look for. And, you know, if I've got one villain that's sort of ticked one box, then I'm looking, you know, the next one on my list, I want to tick a different box, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I mentioned Dominic Green there. Like, that would have been a very controversial pick, because I know some people hate him, but, like, I don't hate him. I find him entertaining, you know? And I almost did, just to sort of stir some controversy there. But he's sort of cut from a similar cloth, I would say. I just think Elliot Carver does it better.
Yeah.
But I like that type of villain.
No, I agree.
What's your next one, James?
So my next one might be stealing your potential next one.
Go on.
So, because the other people I've got as backups are actually henchmen, but I'm going to say Sanchez because he mentioned him before, so I'm presuming you might mention him anyway. But
he was on my shortlist.
Yeah,
but, that's fine. I'm flexible.
That's fine. Yeah, Sanchez as a villain, I think. Again, I like villains that are different than the villains that we've seen previously in other Bond films, or that fall into that mold of, world domination, or that sort of stereotypical villain. He is completely different than anything that's been before, and I think he's a frightening villain as well, as because he's so personal with the way he attacks those who oppose him.
Yeah.
So obviously he kills Felix Leiter's wife, and obviously essentially nearly kills Felix Leiter himself. But Bond's mission leads him to essentially befriend Sanchez, and for the majority of the film, Bond is friends with Sanchez, and that's something we're not really seeing before, because usually you only see him undercover and talk with him as if they're friends for a short period of time. With Sanchez, Bond takes time to go undercover, and Sanchez trusts Bond eventually. When he finds out Bond's true identity, then obviously chaos erupts, and I love how brutal Sanchez is as a character.
Yeah, he's sort of the opposite of a lot of the characters who show no loyalty to anyone. Like Zorin will gun down his own men. There's plenty of villains who are like that.
Yeah.
Sanchez makes a point of saying that he values loyalty, and to the point where you almost pity him when he's betrayed by Bond. If he wasn't, if he hadn't been doing such despicable things, you'd almost the admiration that you sense is you feel is kind of genuine. But in the same way as some of those characters, he's still perfectly capable of being particularly brutal and sinister, to the point where you think the moment that Bond is discovered to have been manipulating him, it's quite scary that you think, oh, he is going to be so angry now.
Yeah.
Because he's hurt. Not because he doesn't care and he's detached from all of this, but he's gonna take this personally now.
Yeah.
Like he did with Crest, and it didn't end well, you know.
And he's just a drug dealer. He's a drug dealer.
Yeah.
You've got Kananga, I suppose, who's similar, but it seems a bit more, street level almost, in terms of villainy.
Yeah, and I like that mix across the series. I like the villains that are sort of like up in their volcanoes, and I like the ones that are down at street level, like you say, and different levels of threat. And I think that's fine to have. Not every one of them needs to be world domination. So yeah, I totally agree, and I would have said it if you didn't.
Good.
Because I think what we decided was, because it's quite hard to pinpoint exactly when a villain becomes a henchman or a henchman becomes a villain, that we're going to do like 3 each of what we consider main villains, and then we're going to give a shout out to a couple of henchmen, because otherwise I think maybe all the good ones would be main villains, and then all the worst ones would be the pointless henchmen that maybe don't do anything or barely have a name or whatever. And I think there is some separation to be made. However, my final pick for a main villain, I'm going to be deliberately controversial and pick what you would almost certainly call a henchman.
Okay, go on. Seems as I stole one of yours anyway, so
I'm going to go for Red Grant.
Yeah, I mean, he is essentially the main villain. And he
feels like the main villain.
Yes.
And that's what I'm judging this on. I'm basing it on a few things. The fact that he is such a prominent part of the film. He is the main physical embodiment of villainy in that film.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the other characters are absent or top level, kind of not involved. He's the only one really present and interacting with Bond in any significant way. And those interactions with Bond are some of the best scenes from the entire series.
Yeah.
And so that's partly why I've chosen to single him out now. But also, I've decided to class him as a main villain because I think if you class him as a henchman, then it's no contest whatsoever among the other henchmen.
Yeah.
If Red Grant is a henchman, then surely he is the greatest henchman there has ever been.
I mean, he's part of the plan. When I say part of the plan, a lot of this is his plan. So I feel like a henchman just does what he's told. And I feel like Red Grant is clever, he's smart, he knows what he's doing, and he thinks for himself. And I think...
I mean, if you think like what other people might use to describe a henchman as, someone who's working for the big bad at the top, but I don't think that quite cuts it as a definition. I've heard characters like Renard described as a henchman. I mean, he's clearly not.
No.
He's another main villain, isn't he?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we discussed it in our episode about From Russia With Love, and we singled out his performance there. He starts off as almost a purely physical threat, and it's incredibly effective, and then he starts to talk, and he starts to gain this sort of level of intelligence, and that doesn't diminish his character at all. It actually makes him even more threatening, the fact that he's got the brains to match the physical aspect. And not only does he sort of give Bond a run for his money, you actually believe he would beat the crap out of him. he would win probably 7 times out of 10, I reckon.
And I think Bond knows that as well. And so is their interaction, especially at the final train sequence, that scene, Bond is essentially realizes he's in a tricky situation there because he knows how dangerous Grant is.
So that's my final pick for the main villain categories.
Yeah.
Because I've tried to make each of the three to kind of represent a different type of villain there, a different texture.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I could have mentioned Kananga.
Yes. Yeah.
I could have mentioned any number of the different Blofeld interpretations, the Telly Savalas, or you know, a lot of people would probably say Christopher Lee, Scaramanga.
Yeah, I've seen him high up on people's lists.
Personally, I'm not going to say that. But there are a lot of good, strong villains. And I think for me, what I look for is someone different from something we've seen before, with a motivation you can follow, and an energy and a charisma and a consistency of character that you can kind of almost, if not get on board with, like in the case of, say, Sanchez, where you might understand some of his betrayal and stuff, then someone who is at the very least acting consistently within their mindset, you know, and someone who lasts in the memory.
Yeah. Memorability. Is that a word? Memorability?
Memorability? No, I don't know. So if we then just briefly expand the definition of a villain to include, you know, perhaps some henchmen. Yeah. Are there any that stand out to you as worthy of particular inclusion in this sort of top 5?
I have a few. Do you want to mention just?
Let's round it off so we have 5 each. Let's just do two more hench people.
2 more hench people. So I'm going to give one to Necros, just because he could very well just be another blonde-haired guy who just does the job and is strong and is there just to act as muscle. But he's more than that. The way he attacks that MI6 safe house, it shows how dangerous he is and how clever he is. I think that's a top sequence. And then obviously he kills Saunders in a really brutal way, so it shows, you know, what his assassin abilities are, as well as, and then he dies in in a really cool action sequence as well, out of a moving plane. So I think for me, Necros is up there.
Yeah, he was on my list, and now I'm struggling. So
sorry. There's some henchmen where I think, he's their top, and then something happens in a film where they ruin that particular character. So I'm thinking people like, you know, Winton Kid. Jaws is a top villain, but is ruined by Moonraker.
Jaws was on my list as a sort of iconic, you know, just the vision, the sight of the character is one of them. Odd Job as well. Not that he's ruined. I didn't really consider him, to be honest. Like, he is probably the archetype kind of most famous henchman.
Yeah. So my other choice would be Xenia Onatopp, because of the different threat. I know I didn't mean to go all GoldenEye heavy, but Xenia Onatopp as someone who's a different villain in terms of the femme fatale that we've seen in previous iterations of female villains.
Yeah.
She is somebody who is incredibly deadly and is physically matched against Bond.
Yeah. I definitely considered Xenia Onatopp. I think my own experience as a child, I didn't particularly enjoy her, so it put me off the film sometimes. Honestly, she was just a little overly sexual for my young sensibilities. I was just like, I turn mute the volume. She's screaming too much. But I mean, I could be contradicting myself here, but one of the ones in my shortlist for hench people is actually someone who arguably is as much a main villain as anyone else, but it's Fiona Volpe.
Yeah.
I mean, if you said that, you know, Red Grant from Russia with Love should count as a villain because, you know, the plan is a lot of his plan, then the same could be said for Volpe, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think so too, because, you know, she says she's the one that says, I will be the one that kills Bond.
Yes,
she
but
she commands it Largo at that point.
Just within the context of the structure of that film and the archetypes that are presented, Largo is very much the main villain of that film, and she is presented as the sort of second to that as a femme fatale archetype. One of the most successful archetypes of a femme fatale character that we've seen in the series. Like, very capable, incorruptible, and one of the few people in that era in particular to be able to withstand the charms of Bond and still maintain allegiance to her cause, with absolute commitment and dignity. That you'd follow her into battle. So she was on the list. I think I had a few others on there. I had cut from a similar cloth to Necros, I suppose, would be Dario from License to Kill. Just the sort of sinister young kid almost that Benicio del Toro plays. But just that glint in his eye. He wasn't sort of on the very short list, but I just wanted to shout him out. And then
I think it's a good shout.
And again, just falling back into my own personal favoritism, Stamper from Tomorrow Never Dies.
Honestly, I love Stamper as well. As he was on my shortlist, but I didn't mention him, so I'm glad you have.
I like that he talks as well as being physical. He's not, we might get onto some of the other characters in the series that are a bit more forgettable, but I don't find him forgettable. He might be a little bit derivative of what's come before. He might be sort of a bit of an amalgamation of the blonde hair from Red Grant and the physicality of Jaws or any of these other tough guys, but the fact that he kind of just has a sort of soft-spoken wit to him at times, particularly when he's kind of bragging that he's hoping to break Dr. Kaufman's record on Bond for keeping him alive with these torture implements. It's just he's funny as well as being a real genuine threat, and you believe like, oh god, Bond would not stand a chance. Even Brosnan at his strongest would not stand a chance against Stamper. He's sort of no nonsense, and you do, for the first time you see the film, kind of spend a bit of time wondering how Bond's going to beat this guy. So I mean, I know that's personal favoritism. I've got a huge soft spot for Tomorrow Never Dies, but he deserves mention.
I agree. I don't think he gets enough mention, Stamper, actually.
There are, of course, characters who I enjoy immensely, like Teehee or Jaws in his first incarnation at the very least. I enjoy Mayday. I enjoy Gobinda from Octopussy. But personal choice came into it a lot of the time here, and those were the ones that, again, they're either playing on my own sentimentalities towards a particular film, or just picking a different flavour that hadn't been represented by some other picks. But
I think it speaks volumes that I found it easier to find villains that are good than it was for me to find villains that are not so good.
Really hard to narrow it down,
because some of the villains that I think are bad probably aren't that bad, but compared to some of the other villains,
let's get onto it then. Let's get into your first pick of what you were able to scramble from the list. Like, what's your first pick for a bad villain, and then just talk a little bit about why that is.
Well, I am going to go for another character that you've previously mentioned, and that's Safin.
Oh, you took my pick. All right, well, let's just both share this pick and talk about why that is. Do you want
to talk first? Because I feel like I've stolen that one from you.
No, it's your pick, and I do enough of the talking here.
The problem with Safin is that he's introduced really well, I think. The scene where he confronts a young Madeline with the mask, he sets himself up to be this really menacing, scary bad guy.
Yep.
And then when you find more information about him, his motives don't make sense. He just sits there and just talks like he's almost like a stereotypical villain.
Yeah.
And he just doesn't bring anything new to the villain universe.
No, I think I vaguely remember we did Games with James not long ago. That was reviews, and one of the reviews mentioned in particular the fact that his characterization is kind of just pulled from the playbook of previous villains and just a loose collection of characterizations from other characters. Just, I'm not entirely convinced that it makes sense, the fact that he was around when Madeline was a child. I think he's miscast. I think Rami Malek is too young.
Yes, I agree, yeah.
I think they've tried to convince us that he's older than the actor is.
I wonder whether that's why they've put the scarring on his face, because there's no need for that other than the fact that he says, "Oh, that's what Mr. White caused," or whatever. But I think that maybe that to try and hide the fact that he is young as an actor.
Perhaps, yeah. I mean, I'll come back to this once we've done our list, but I think that there's an aspect of like kind of stunt casting. It feels like the latest Oscar-winning actor just walks into the role.
Yeah.
Whether it suits them or not, it's like cashing in on a moment of popularity for a particular actor, and
But because you don't understand his motives, because the point is that he wants to get rid of Spectre because of everything they've done and stuff like that. Okay, that makes sense. That part of his character makes sense. But then the fact that he wants to then distribute some virus across the world and stuff, that doesn't connect.
There were rumours that some of the delays to the release of No Time to Die were caused by trying to rework the plot, perhaps because the plot centred around something that they didn't want to focus on during the pandemic. There was this issue around contagion and not being able to touch people and spreading this nanovirus, that one particular reviewer claimed that it almost looked like his performance was pieced together in ADR with cutaways and shots over the shoulder and stuff. And I wonder if what we got in the end was the original intention for the character. Because as you say, there seems to be no motivation for him beyond him achieving his goals. Why does he carry on?
And there was a strong rumour that he was meant to be Dr. No, and they were going to redo Dr. No.
Yeah.
And I sort of wonder whether that was the case. He gets called Doctor at one point, even though he's never introduced as one. And it does make me think that a lot of his character was changed a lot, and because of that might have ruined his overall character anyway.
For transparency, we've recorded The Spy Who Loved Me and then this episode. Now, there's a chance, depending on when our other episode gets recorded, we might swap the order of these. And we touched upon in that episode how a film like that doesn't invite scrutiny because it's not taking itself seriously, and so it doesn't invite that level of scrutiny towards plot points and consistencies and motivation and things like that. And in a film like The Spy Who Loved Me, you don't need to answer, well, why is Stromberg doing this? What's his motivation?
Yeah.
But in a film that takes itself as seriously as No Time to Die does and other later movies, it becomes so obvious when someone does something that's illogical and unmotivated.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And he was, first name I came up with on this list. So I think we can both have that one as our first pick.
Yeah, let's do that.
And then I'll move on to my second one, and we'll just...
go for it.
So this one's going to pain me because I recently declared this as among the top, if not my favourite Bond movie of all time. I've got a huge affection for it. I recently travelled to Vienna and visited many of the locations that feature in the movie. I'm, of course, talking about The Living Daylights. And so it doesn't give me great pleasure to put Brad Whittaker on this list.
I have put him on my list as well as... but go on, why have you put Brad Whittaker on there?
Well, a part of this, and a big part, is probably personal, and it's probably shared by you as well. Mm-hmm. Because although The Living Daylights was obviously first, I know that we both saw Joe Don Baker as Jack Wade first.
Yeah, that's true.
And I feel like he suits Jack Wade more. I feel like it played to his strengths more. And obviously he'd worked with Martin Campbell before, and that's how he got that into GoldenEye. But as Brad Whittaker, I just feel like I don't hate him at all. I don't dislike him even. I just think I'm always sort of slightly aware that he's not the best character in the film, and not even playing the best character that actor has played in the Bond series. I just think slightly underdeveloped. I think give him more to do and let him establish his personality a little bit more. Let's have a bit of context as to why he's involved. There's some stuff that's amusing about him, his obsession with war and his collection. But ultimately, I think this is nowhere near the kind of Safin levels of problematic characters. It's just, I had to pick someone and I picked him.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I've been trying to figure out my own. I did look at some other lists to see where other people have placed him, and I actually saw one with Brad Whitaker quite high up, actually. But I personally think he's quite miscast.
I think I agree. I'm willing to put a lot of it down to just personal perspective and the order in which we came to these films. However, I think you could easily, or other people may have easily, put Koskov on the list. Now, I think Koskov is fine because I like his softness, because it plays into the fact that he's convincingly a defector and he develops a fondness for Bond, and therefore he can't be obviously villainous. But I think that because of that, the film needed someone to be more sinister.
Yeah.
To be a little bit more of a strong villainous presence to make up for the slightly unorthodox villain that we have in Koskov. It needed, as a villainous kind of whole that the movie presents, it's sort of two quite fairly lightweight villains.
Yes, yeah.
And a decent henchman, but I think it could have done with someone who was just more ruthless. I think it could have just lent the film a higher sense of dread and threat with someone a little bit more threatening in that role.
Yeah, no, I agree. Let's
have another one from you, James.
Okay. Now, I know with this, I think with this one I'm going to say, you've mentioned previously that if he had a different name, you might actually like the villain a bit more. But I'm going to go with Charles Gray's version of Blofeld, because even if I did change his name, there is the stupid moments where he dresses up as a woman to try and kidnap Tiffany Case, and he has a escape pod called a Batho Sub.
Are you looking at my list there, James?
I might as well be. I just think, obviously, he is Blofeld, and the previous iteration of Telly Savalas' Blofeld is so different to this one, and even if he wasn't Blofeld, I still probably would put him in this list.
Yeah, I mean, I think the kindest thing you can say about the Charles Gray Blofeld is that he's just extremely lightweight.
Yes.
And just one of the sort of lower stakes villains, and Blofeld shouldn't be that. Yes, his plot is, high threat, but he's never a threat himself. He seems like he would be relatively easy to deal with. There's problems with other Blofelds, as I've said, like Donald Pleasance, Telly Savalas. They never seem like they're the guy who was in those early films. But, we've discussed our own private fan theory around Blofeld and how it actually kind of works to imagine them as doppelgangers and doubles and things like that of some guy still higher up. To create this web of intrigue and a smokescreen that Bond can never penetrate. It allows you to analyse each performance individually rather than compare it to a previous one. Taken on their own merits, Donald Pleasance is an iconic look, but he's not that calm, deep, threatening voice that we've heard. Telly Savalas is a sort of more physical but intelligent, kind of almost like a mobster, but again, not really the guy behind the screen or the guy, feeding fish to his cat. So that fan theory, which I don't enter into with any real seriousness, but it does allow me to take each one on its merits. But even if you do that, like you say, Charles Gray's Blofeld is just a weak one.
Yeah.
However, there is a worse Blofeld.
Is that big?
And that's my next pick. It's Christoph Waltz.
Okay.
He could have been a great Bond villain, but there's something about his performance that seems to be attempting to distill this notion of a Bond villain down to its most basic essence of calmness, of stillness, but still with a kind of overused Christoph Waltz attitude to it, where every now and then I'm going to just say a funny word in a funny voice, and it sounds like you've taken, what's his name, Landa from Inglourious Bastards, but you've just watered him down, and you've taken off the R-rated language and the sort of Tarantino-esque edge. You've rounded him off, and you've squidged him, and you've squashed him into a more mainstream, accessible version of a character like that. And you've just still had him say his kind of cuckoo, quirkiness, hello. But the performance of it itself, it's kind of just like, this is nothing new. And it should be, from someone who's more than capable of delivering like a career best, series best villain performance. To see him kind of just retread with less enthusiasm a role he's more or less done before was a bit disappointing. And then you get into what they did with the character itself, which you just think, you have stripped this character of all threat that it ever once had, because you've taken this character who was once untouchable and unintimidatable, just this person who was the head of Spectre, this terrorist organization that spent its time threatening politicians and people around the world, that just had little operations going on all over the place in Thunderball. Let's check in with this branch, let's check in with the French division. And you've taken that guy and you've said, actually, no, he's done it all for Bond. All to get back at Bond. It was all for him.
Yeah.
Because of some daddy issues he once had. I mean, they literally did the Gold member Austin Powers plot and expected us to take it seriously.
Yeah, I never even made that comparison, actually.
So for me, it was one of the worst handlings of a character, that, like an established character, that I can think of.
Yeah.
I think No Time to Die made a couple of steps towards improving the character.
Yes, yeah.
By sort of suggesting that Spectre would have existed anyway. It sort of downplayed the whole, it was all because of you, Bond, little brother kind of aspect.
Well, that's the whole personal element just really ruined it for me.
But Spectre was just terrible from a plot perspective. I mean, it lessens the effect of Skyfall in retrospect, just by attempting to convince us that Silver was in any way working for Spectre, which we know he wasn't if you watch Skyfall. I don't know why Sam Mendes would agree to that. I mean, that's the danger of a more connected universe that they attempted with Daniel Craig's, is that one film can end up damaging another.
Yeah.
Because I think Daniel Craig's series was a really promising start that got lost along the way, attempted to get back on track, but it actually got back on a different track. And then licensing things changed the producers' motivations, changed their priorities. They started building towards a sort of post-Marvel style continuity that they hadn't planned for in the beginning. And what you end up with after 5 films is this sort of track-hopping sense that they went in one direction, then they hard right, and then they course corrected, and then they sort of swerved, and it feels like a car sort of snaking out of control down a street.
Yeah.
And the overall sense at the end of it is just one of dissatisfaction, and the handling of Blofeld is a huge missed opportunity from that perspective. So we've touched upon a couple of main villains there and why they failed, and they all failed for different reasons, I think. But if you were to just do a henchman list, I think it would be difficult to narrow it down, because there's a lot of terrible henchmen that just kind of barely get a word, barely get a line, barely get a name.
Yeah.
So it's hard to distill, I haven't counted them, really. Unless I've seen them as like a missed opportunity for something better.
Yeah.
But really I'm focusing on, again, that sense of, if you're going to include a character into a film and you've already got your hero and you've already got your villain, then the henchperson, the right-hand man or woman, should provide a different texture, a different flavor, a different feeling, a different mood, a different archetype. Yeah. And where they don't, or they don't iterate on something and bring something unique, or if it's just literally like, oh yeah, remember that character? Well, here they are again, but not as good. Then that's where I would class them as being weak. And, that would lead into probably my first choice, if that makes sense to go in that way, was because I mentioned Fiona Volpe, and I think, a second-rate template cookie cutter, here's that character again, but not as good, is Helga Brandt from You Only Live Twice.
Well, okay.
And we spoke about this in the You Only Live Twice episode. I don't think we need to talk at length about her, but everything that Fiona Volpe did well was because they allowed her to develop with time and gave her scenes that reinforced her ability and capability to direct the men around her and to lead. And it feels like making You Only Live Twice, they attempted to sort of shortcut to having this same archetype, the same redhead, the same moments of seduction and betrayal, but without any of the contextual scenes that suggest that she's capable or deserves respect or could be in any way a threat or a genuine leader. She's just presented as someone beautiful and weak.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
So do you have any others?
I'm going to say 2 because really they count as 1. I think you probably might know what I'm about to say, but I'm going to go for Bambi and Thumper.
That's fair.
They don't play a big part in the film, but they're meant to leave a big impression, and they are just... We don't need to talk too much about Bambi and Thumper anyway, as we mentioned a lot about them in the Diamonds Are Forever episode, but yeah, they fight Bond in the most slow motion way possible.
Yeah, I think we mentioned in that episode how they always appear in those compilations.
Yeah.
But really, their part in the movie is nothing more than that. It's like they were created to be in the trailer, and they don't bring anything beyond just the odd, there's that shot of him getting kicked. Yeah, but that's all.
Yeah, and they're easily dispatched by a bit of water.
All the best to them. I hope they were able to live off the conventions for many years.
Yeah.
And the appearances and the signings, but they're in the film for like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
It's tough to draw a distinction between a character that's just not very interesting and a character that's a failure to be all they could be. Characters like Hans from You Only Live Twice, or Chang from Moonraker, or Shandor from The Spy Who Loved Me. They're just sort of generic archetypes. They don't bring anything to that character. They're not bad. They're just dull and uninteresting.
Yeah.
I almost mentioned as a positive, just to stir the pot, really, I was going to bring up Elvis from Quantum of Solace.
Yeah, I had Elvis, but then I removed him.
He's not... I mean, I like him for the same reason that I've said before, of just like something different, a different type. Like physically, intimidating-wise, obviously very weak, ineffectual, but memorable to me at least. He makes me smile. He doesn't frustrate me when I watch that film. I suppose certain characters are highlighted as being weak when they're in a film that otherwise purports to be attempting to hit all those iconic marks of being a fan favourite. I'm going to single out Patrice in Skyfall.
Okay.
Because I feel like that film in many ways attempted to be a crowd-pleasing return to form after the miss that a lot of people thought Quantum of Solace was. And there was a lot riding on it with the anniversary that year and the Jubilee, and there was a lot of British pride that year with the Olympics and all that. And I feel like that film is missing that kind of classic henchman with some kind of claw or something, And what we got instead was a very bland, forgettable character.
You're right. No, I agree. He's in the train fight, and then he gets killed in Shanghai, doesn't he? But
why not make him a little bit more interesting in some way?
Because he plays a significant part of Skyfall's opening act, essentially. But like you say, he is forgettable, and if he's playing such a big part, then we should have more characterization to him.
I mean, he's a little like Edmund Slate from Quantum of Solace, but I think the difference is that Skyfall is so often celebrated as being, this sort of modern day classic. You know, it's like the Goldfinger of its age. This, you know, we took a break from the Spectre storyline to do Goldfinger, and we took a break from the Quantum storyline to do Skyfall. It was the most watched film in many, many years. People came back to the series for Skyfall.
Yeah.
And you just think, in so many ways, Sam Mendes was trying to harken back to the older films. He was introducing those elements that had been phased out in Casino Royale. You know, he was introducing Q, he was introducing the DB5 and some of the gadgetry. Why not make this relatively significant secondary antagonist have something of interest?
Yeah.
Why not? You know, even the guy in No Time to Die had like a bionic eye or something.
No, I agree. Yeah.
So, there we go. That was a nice conversation there about some of our favourite villains and henchmen and henchwomen from the series, and some of our least favourite, and why that is. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface, so if this is a topic you want to come back and talk about at some point in the future, James, I'm sure we will.
Yeah, and I'm sure when we cover some of the films that we've not got round to, we'll go into more depth then.
But for now, we'll leave it there. That was our episode on best and worst villains. Let's play games with James.
Games with James.
Games with James.
Okay, James, I'm going to have to send you a few links in order to do this one.
Right, okay.
So, James, we've just been talking about some of our best and worst villains and henchmen from across the series, and I thought I'd keep the Games with James this week on topic. So, we are going to play... Oh, what's this long-winded title? This is Guess the Villain from the 10 seconds or thereabouts interview clip with the actor who played them.
I like this. Yeah, okay, cool.
So, I've sent you a link. In that link are, I think, 12 numbered files.
Yes, I've got the clips, yep.
So, when you're instructed to do so, please click on the one that I tell you to click on and not the others.
Okay.
You may listen to it once or maybe twice and tell me who you think that villain is.
Okay.
But first, would you mind providing me with a sound that can be used if and when you get a question correct?
Ooh, well, I'll try and go for lines that villains say to keep in line with the theme. So I'm going to go with an Elliot Carver one and go delicious.
Yes, I think I used delicious when we did your James Takes Over episode.
Oh, did you?
But, no, we can use that. That's
yeah,
fine.
Okay.
And could I have a sound for when and if you get a question wrong?
I'm just looking at my list of films here. Oh, we'll go for You're Lying. No! Can you tell what villain that was?
That was Renard.
Yeah, well done, yes.
Well done up. It took a while. Okay, without further ado, here is clip number 1.
So I make it to the lecture hall, and she pulls me in the class. She goes, "Hey, are you ready to do this?" I go, "Yeah, I'm going to get my point."
Okay, I'm going to stop it straight away. It's Rami Malek as Safin. Delicious.
That is correct, yes.
Yeah.
Again, this is another quiz where you may end up getting them all, but I thought it'd be fun anyway. So,
I think it'll be tough.
Okay, number 2.
But I really studied, and he gave me the passion that I still have for the English language. I love the English language.
Same passion for America and democracy?
Oh, well, that goes without saying.
Is it Kamal Khan, Louis Jordan, whatever? Is it Kamal Khan? Delicious.
Yes, it is. Correct. Well done. Yeah, quite a distinctive accent there.
Yes,
very suave. Okay, number 3.
Aber jedenfalls war es so, dass ich doch einen gewissen Bammel hatte vor dem ersten großen amerikanischen in Hollywood zu drehenden Film.
I'm gonna go with Goldfinger himself, Gert Fröbe.
That is incorrect.
You're lying. No! Who was it?
That was Kurt Jürgens,
Oh,
who played
really?
Stromberg in The Spy Who Loved Me.
Wow. I've never heard him speak other than within the confines of the film.
So there we go. I'm glad whenever you get at least one wrong, it means the quiz is not too easy. So thank you.
Okay.
Coming up next, number 4.
Et voilà, cette femme étonnante. Je suis très heureux. Françoise amène quelque chose de très vivant. Et on croit vraiment qu'elle est là, enfin. Avec son humour et puis ses moments de joie, ses moments de consternation quand elle découvre ce bidonville.
Ooh, okay. So the man sounds French. I was going to say Matthew Almeric, but it doesn't sound like him. So who else is a French villain? I can't think off the top of my head, so I'm just going to go with Dominic Green. It's not him. I know it doesn't sound like
I think
him.
you know it's not correct, is it?
No.
You're lying. No!
That is the actor Michel Lonsdale, who plays Hugo Drax.
Of course. Yes. God's sake. Right.
Okay, number 5.
Every year they come to us, and Jamie does the cooking, which is wonderful. We give a party for the street.
Oh, wonderful.
Which is, in the morning. Then we have our presents after lunch.
This doesn't sound like an interview that happened in proximity to the films, at least, surely. I can only presume it's an actor who's aged. So, I'm going to go with Dr. No.
You're lying. No!
Well, I've stopped worrying if the quiz was too easy and started to worry if it was too hard. That was not Dr. No, I'm afraid, no. That was the legendary actor Julian Glover, who played Christatos in For Your Eyes Only.
Yeah, that's definitely an older interview.
Along with Walter Donovan in Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. By older interview, I assume you mean he is an old man in that interview.
Yes.
Which he is, yes.
Yeah.
But he's also been in Game of Thrones. And,
I've not seen him in anything for a long time.
Very charming man by the sounds of that.
Yes.
Okay.
Number 6.
Het zit elkaar niet in de weg omdat ik een waanzinnige planner ben. Ik heb gewoon een agenda waar ik dingen inschrijf. En dan soms is een hele week, dan staat er alleen maar atelier onder elkaar. Dan neem ik niets aan, omdat ik weet dat ik die week moet besteden aan schilderen.
Okay, so I'm just going to go and call it for Matthew Almeric for Dominic Green.
Do you think he was speaking French, do you?
I didn't listen to all of it, I just cut it off straight away. But it sounded like French.
Did you not listen to the whole thing?
No, I just presumed it sounded a bit like him.
Oh, overconfidence, James. I'm sorry, that is not correct.
Oh, man.
You're lying. No!
That was Jeroen Krabbe, who plays Koskov.
Oh, really?
Number 7.
Okay.
Fox Searchlight, who'd made it, they saw the first cut of this thing and they went straight to video. That's what they said. The guy, the producer at the time, Umberto, he kind of begged Fox Searchlight and said, "Look, we've got 100 movies here. This guy shot the ass off this thing."
So that's got to be Robert Carlyle as Renard.
Delicious.
That is correct, James. Well done. You are back on track. Hey. Yeah, well done. Quite recognisable voice there.
Yeah.
Let's keep this streak going. Okay, number 8.
Pues se creó desde el principio, desde lo que estaba escrito en la página, que es lo que hay que prestar atención realmente, qué posibilidades tiene eso. Yo vi muchas posibilidades. Hablé con Sam Mendes, él me dio muy buenas.
So I'm going to go with Javier Bardem for that one.
Delicious.
That is correct. Well
yes.
done. If you listen carefully, you can actually hear him say Sam Mendes.
Yeah, no, but to be honest, I did think it was him before he said that. So.
Okay, well done.
For the record.
Number 9.
I was training to teach art, and you had to do a subsidiary course, and I was told the easiest course to do that required the least amount of work was the drama course.
Oh God, I don't know who that could be. I'm just gonna say. I mean, I know it's not. I'm just gonna say Red Grant.
You're lying. No!
Oh dear, James. No, that is Jonathan Pryce.
Oh my God! Why didn't I not think of him? Why?
Who played Elliot Carver?
I don't know why I didn't think of him. Right? Yeah. That's silly of me. Right.
Never mind. Okay, number 10.
He refused to have his hair shaved under his doctor's orders. So I had a little meeting with him one day in Madrid, and he said, how do you feel about having your head shaved?
It does sound a bit like Robert Shaw, but it also doesn't. I'm just going to go with Robert Shaw, Red Grant. Delicious.
Correct. Well done.
Okay.
Well done, James. And number 11, the penultimate one.
Ich kann nicht so gut Deutsch sprechen. Ich habe nie studiert. Ich habe nie gelernt. Ich habe auf Deutsch gesungen und gedreht. Das habe ich zweimal gemacht.
You know, it actually sounded like Christopher Lee putting on an accent. It could be Largo, or it could be Le Chiffre. I'm just going to play it one more time.
One more time, go on.
Ich kann nicht so gut Deutsch sprechen. Ich habe nie studiert.
It's not Le Chiffre. I'm just going to go with Largo.
You're lying. No!
James.
Yeah.
That was Christopher Lee.
I was Christopher. I told you it sounded like Christopher Lee. God damn it! Why does he?
Multilingual Christopher Lee.
Oh my god!
I love that worked. Okay, and the final one, number 12.
Okay.
There were times when on the cinema screen I've been soft and sentimental, sometimes almost romantic. Times I play mean, it's for money. When I'm being soft and sentimental, I like to do it because that's my real nature.
He talks in a very cool way there. It's Telly Savalas, it's got to be. Delicious.
Yes, of course it is.
Yeah.
Sounding very, very cool indeed.
Yeah.
Almost Orson Welles.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, well, you finished on a high.
Yeah.
James. By my count, I think you got about 6 out of 12, so 50-50, but I will let the text-to-speech confirm that, as per tradition.
Ah, yes, the legendary James Turner Wit. Or at least half of it. He scored half. He's a half-wit. Or moron, if you prefer.
That's harsh, that shouldn't be allowed to be said.
Every time I appreciate your reactions. Just reacting to nothing and just putting your trust completely in me. You sort of dictate how it has to go, but I appreciate you playing along. So how did you find that, James?
I thought it would be a doddle. The only one I thought would be like, oh, he'll throw a Goldfinger one in because I know he was dubbed and stuff, so I thought, anyone who speaks German, it'll be Goldfinger. And obviously I was completely wrong, and there were many ones that fooled me, even ones I should have got. I should have got the Jonathan Pryce one, to be fair.
That was the Bond villain interview actors voice clips quiz with games with James.
Yep. One day I'll get them all right, but that today is not that day.
But it is not today.
Games with James.
And there you have it. That was our episode on the best and worst Bond villains and hench people. Stay tuned for our next episode. In the meantime, you can contact us on social media at BondJamCast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I will keep calling it Twitter until I'm forced not to. And follow us on all of those to stay notified as to when our next episode will be coming up. And in the meantime, you can leave a rating or a review on your podcast platform of choice. 5 stars, please. And until then, James.
Keep spreading that jam. Don't forget to spread that jam. I said it wrong there. I've ruined the whole thing. Let's start the whole podcast again. Don't forget to spread that.
Fell off my chair.
Don't forget to spread that jam, baby.
Oh, I don't like that.
Sorry. Don't forget
we'll
to
go
spread
with it.
that jam.
We'll go with it.
Okay.
Just because leave them with a feeling of unease. But don't do that again. Take care.
Cheerio.